Next up, Kaynan, Kruschewsky taking on Dylan, Mantello. And Kruschewsky, I watched exactly one fight, and it was a devastating knockout, and all the announcers were talking about was his jiu-jitsu. So I got to go back and watch this guy's grappling and familiarize myself, see if it's all it's cracked up to be. They had very nice things to say. But the power definitely looked to be there. He looked much faster than his opponent, creating good angles for himself, and really, really aggressive. Like, had no fear to get into the pocket, to exchange, and he just felt like he was reading his opponent really well. I felt like he didn't take much damage in that fight either. So I'm curious to see, how he could do against Mantello, because Mantello, we've seen him get lit up with some damage. I've only watched a handful of his fights, I think 2 or 3, and he was getting hit a lot in the fights that I was watching, bloodied, battered, damaged, all that stuff. But he does seem like a tough guy who can rally back a little bit. The things that concern me, though, getting taken down in like the first 30 seconds by guys that don't look like they're that talented, just some red flags for me on his side. So if the jiu-jitsu is as good as it's cracked up to be, and you hit really hard and the other guy gets hit all the time, I am a little bit concerned for Mantello. But you got to remember that the New York boys can teach you how to wrestle once again. That's always a possibility. So I got to look into his wrestling chops, but he's coming out of the Serra-Longo camp. I always respect those guys, because they're going to come in prepared, come in shape, fight their hardest, be well coached, well prepared. So I like those things, obviously, in an underdog. But for me, I did see like an athleticism gap, it felt like to me, when I was just watching the two of them, because I actually watched them side by side as well. And I was just like, whoa, like this guy just looked a little bit faster, a little bit more dynamic. So this one, it doesn't necessarily surprise me to see this gentleman favored. Gordo, how do you feel about this matchup? And do you have any thoughts from a betting perspective?
I have plenty of thoughts on this one, but they're not very nice. So I saw Pierce nodding his head a bit. I'd love to hear his thoughts on this one as well to get this one going.
Yeah, so we speak about Dylan Montello being from that camp, Serra-Longo. Respectfully, Dylan, if you're listening, I'm sorry. I think he's a disgrace to that gym. He he's tough. I'll give him that. But I'm getting AJ Cunningham vibes from Dylan Montello, and I did get an early line on Kaynan Kruschewsky. It's weird. He's Brazilian. He sounds like he's from like the Asia.
Poland, bro. That's exactly what I thought. I was like, this is a KSW fighter, and then I'm like, what?
Sounds like the Brazilian Russians. They got an ACA, but I did play the early line on Kaynan when I was surprised they opened him -150. So best believe I'm betting that. But I also played his KO, because you look at Dylan Montello, it's like AJ Cunningham, man. He's tough, but why is he tough? Because he gets hit a lot and he takes a lot of damage. I mean, we saw in Dylan's last fight against Charlie Alexander, he got cracked. He got dropped really bad, and then literally like 10 seconds later, the dude shoots his head on a guillotine, and Dylan found the finish in the first round with 1 second left. So good for him on that. But you talk about Kaynan. He does have, I think he's been a black belt for a couple years now, maybe like 3 or 4 years. But I will say I've noticed Kaynan's fallen in love with his hands recently, which honestly I don't think is a bad thing. I like his striking a lot. He's aggressive. He's got good knees in the clinch. He really puts a pace on opponents. And I might as well share, because I taped Mantello first. I said this is how you beat Dylan Montello. Willing to throw down, good takedown defense, not a midget, good cardio. And while Kaynan's takedown defense, I wouldn't say it's the best, because if you look at his record, Liam, I'm sure you didn't have time to watch this. The no contest with Damian Lapilus, who is Taylor Lapilus' brother, he lost that fight. He lost at 29-28, and it was by the grappling. Damian Lapilus, who's a jobber in Aris FC, he took him down in a fight that Kaynan could have easily won that if he didn't settle on his back. So that's my main concern here. But I don't think Dylan has the wrestling chops to get him down. He'll go for like upper body lock, trip takedowns. But I think if he's attacking takedowns that way, I think he's going to get chewed up with knees in the clinch. And I just think Kaynan's just at a massive athleticism advantage here, man. I think he's going to, if he hurts Dylan, because we've seen Dylan hurt in a lot of fights. The John Ramirez fight, he fought him twice. And both fights, he honestly was rocked against the cage. And I just don't like the optics I'm seeing from Dylan when he gets hit. But I will say, for as tough as he is, I guess his best weapon on the feet is his jab. That sets up a lot of his shots. But I just don't know. Kaynan seems like a guy that's going to crack. And when Kaynan, I've seen in a lot of his fights, when he hurts you, he goes for the kill. And I couldn't help but play Kaynan by KO. I think it's like plus 200 right now. I still don't mind that, because considering he's minus 250, minus 230 right now, I wouldn't go too crazy on the money line. He's not a lock by any means. I still think if Kaynan makes the UFC, he's going to be a fade down the line because I'm not a big fan of like his grappling, but styles make fights, man. And I don't see Dylan hitting takedowns at a high clip. And if they're going to strike, I think Kaynan's going to go for the kill and he's going to get it.
All right, Gordo, you got what you wanted. What do you think, brother?
I did get what I wanted because I won't lie. I peeked the Bet MMA tips. I wanted to see what Pierce was on, and I did see that early line on someone here in Kaynan, and you had to respect it because I do think that early line was the way to go. Now, with that being said, my eyes and my notes doing tape was I can't wait to have this Kaynan guy in the UFC because I will fade this guy like no other. I do not think he is UFC level at any clip. I don't think he should be this or minus 250 against anybody. The problem is Dylan Mantello doesn't really impress either. I did my tape first on Kaynan, and I was going out there, and I'm like, no matter what I get in front of me, I'll fade this guy because I think he makes a lot of mistakes. I lied, not no matter what, because Dylan Mantello makes just as many mistakes, if not more. But you look at a guy in Kaynan, he really just overextends, and I think that you said it perfectly. He's a guy who will be a fade down the future because he's kind of fallen in love with his hands. Although he has some decent grappling, he just has so many realms in which he can be beaten. He can be taken down. He can be controlled. I think that on the feet, he overextends on his punches, doesn't have the most technicality. Although he does have that power threat, he's swinging heavily. He's going through it, can have his back taken. He makes so many mistakes inside the cage that someday somebody's going to take advantage of it. The problem I have here is I just don't think Dylan Mantello is the type of guy to do that. With that being said, I don't think I'm necessarily the type of guy to go out there and lay chalk here on Kaynan. I wish I got the price that Pierce did. I just don't think I can go out there and parlay or play these big numbers on fighters who I don't think are that good. And that's just my personal opinion on it, right? Kaynan's a guy who I think that on the feet in the striking, although he is super aggressive, is there to be countered. And it's not like he has a perfect chin. He has been knocked out before. He has these holes in his game. You add in the fact that he can be taken down and he is overextending himself in the pocket. The counters are there for a sharp striker. The takedowns are there for a tough grappler. The holes in his game are very evident. However, we get a guy in Dylan Mantello and he is being hit with everything thrown his way. Although he is a durable guy who's going to keep going forward, and I like his resiliency. He's a punching bag. He gets hit by everything, and he can be walked against the cage, and that's not something you want to see. Add in the fact that I don't think he's the fastest striker. I don't think he's the most dominant wrestler. The guy leaves a lot to be desired. The problem I have here is if we have a guy in Mantello who I do think, although he's going to be a slower fighter, does have the ability to land some counters, does have the ability to mix in takedowns. If this line keeps climbing, the same way we saw lines climbing last week, it's going to have to take me to take a small stab on the guy inside the distance because just the way Kaynan overextends himself, the line keep climbing on a Mantello KO is definitely going to be there. That's just my read inside of it. I don't want to force any action on this because I do think this is one of the lowest level fights we've seen in a while. However, when I take a step back and I try to look at the way the UFC is trying to put this together is who's the more exciting fighter? Who's the fighter that they can go out there and put highlight reels on? It's an aggressive guy like Kaynan. And although he can be hit and although we can fade him down the stretch, I don't know if this is the spot to do so. So shout out to Pierce getting the early number. I think this is going to be a stay away fight for me. Although Mantello, I think, has a decent, well-rounded offensive skill set, he lacks the defensive abilities that I want to see against a guy who's as aggressive as Kaynan here. Either way, though, should be a fun scrap. The question I have, because I haven't actually looked at this yet, I saw the lines, I saw the fight, I turned off my laptop, and I said, there's no way I'm betting on this fight. What's the under here? Under 2.5 is minus 2.5 is minus 120. That might be the way to go because I think you have a killer to be killed style here in Kaynan who is going to keep going forward, overextend himself and be caught, or really put on the pressure against a guy Mantello can be hit by anything. It kind of reminds me of that Nguyen versus Cunningham fight like Pierce mentioned last week where a finish should materialize just because of how aggressive these guys are, not because of the most potent finishers. So interesting way to look at it. Shout out to Pierce getting the early number. Might have to look at the under for me though.
And yeah, I was kind of surprised. I'm seeing like the market is pricing Kruschewsky's main path to victory as like a decision, which seems asinine to me. Because he does kind of seem. Yeah, I guess. And you know, here's the other thing. I did want to give him the credit because I watched the Archie Colgan fight when it was happening. Archie Colgan's the truth. And Archie Colgan did absolutely beat him like he stole something, but you know, he fought through that. You know, he dealt with a lot of adversity there. He was clearly the less physical athlete in that spot, and he was at a skill disadvantage, and he was getting a lot of damage, and he never quit. So I don't think of him as like a guy who I expect to quit here, but I just think, you know, the way that these guys fight, somebody's probably getting finished. The other thing I want to say, Mantello by sub would be the other thing I would be kind of interested in here. Just because I feel like, to Pierce's point, like if this fight just plays out on the feet, it seems like he's going to be walking into a ton of traffic. But if he's able to get the fight to the ground, maybe he's able to mix it up a little bit. Long term, though, why do I think Kaynan is favored and going to win and probably the side here? Dana White says all the time they're looking for Brazilian stars, and like 14-1 record, that's fine. They could shine that up. They could give him the lowest end guys in the division. Ike Villanueva, how are you, brother? Let's get off the couch. Like they'll just find some guy that owes a fight, like Alex Reyes from 6 years ago or something, to fight this guy, get him a couple wins. They're trying to build any Brazilian star that they can. And you notice there's 4 fighters from Brazil on this fight card. So I think that they're trying to showcase some of that talent. So for me, that's the other thing that points me to the favorite here. But do I want to lay this kind of chalk price? No, not necessarily. Just think that he's going to get the job done. Next up,
I'll add one more thing because you guys were talking about the under. I'm not as passionate as you guys. While I did play as KO, I'm not a big fan of how often Kaynan's fights play out in the clinch. I feel like that's sometimes a concern of his. So maybe it drags out to the over, but maybe it's priced like that because Mantello's never been finished, and AJ Cunningham's never been finished until last week. So it's an interesting price, honestly. But you said Archie couldn't even get him out of there, but like Archie's style is a lot different than Kaynan. Archie has the takedowns that he'll mix in once he hurts you. He's kind of like he gets finishes, but he's a good point fighter. And Kaynan, if he hurts Dylan, he's going for the kill. He's not going for a takedown.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also, I feel like he'd be a little bit more likely to mix in the submission threats as well, whereas Archie's a little bit more controlling. So fair play. I think that's a good point. Next up.